Hey there, and welcome to College is Fine, Everything's Fine, the podcast that helps you keep your head above campus chaos without losing your sense of self or your sense of humor. I'm Dr. Sarah Olivo.
And I'm Dr. Liz Seidler. We're clinical psychologists who help students navigate everything from friendship drama and academic pressure to figuring out who they are when nobody and everybody is watching.
We take real stories from college life and turn them into simple, science-backed tips you can actually use. No fluff, just what works.
Think of it as your mental health toolkit for thriving, not just surviving college life. All right, Sarah, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Okay, here we go. All right. Hi, listeners. We're really excited to kind of go back to a topic that we have not talked about in a really long time, but it's definitely something that I see a lot in my clinical practice. And it's the college experience of a student athlete is unique. And we were lucky to be introduced to two experts in the field of sports. And I would love to introduce themselves, and I think we're going to have a great conversation today. Oh, Carrie, Rhodie, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having us. My name is Carrie Potoff. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work out of Sasko River Center in Darien.
My name is
Hi,
Rhodie
Carrie.
Lorenz. Thank you also for having us. We're excited to be here. And I'm a mental performance coach, and my background is in education and fitness primarily. And I work with college level athletes, some high school as well. But my focus is really on college level athletes, helping them with their mental game and all of the stresses and pressures that go along with performing at a high level in college.
I'm so happy to have you here, and I love the fact that you called it a mental game.
Yeah.
Because in a way, I don't think there's a person out there who would say, or an athlete or a coach out there who would say that there's not a mental aspect to the game that someone is playing. So when you say mental game, can you tell us what you mean by that?
Sure. I think at any point, athletes are playing two games. They're playing the sport that they engage in, and then they have a whole lot of things going on in their heads that are going to either help their performance or hinder their performance. And so while they go to practice and get guidance from their athletic coaches about different skills and drills and exercises they're going to be doing and their whole weightlifting programs, they're often not given as much guidance in the mental performance aspect. And similar to building our physical strength, that mental strength is a really important part of our game, our ability to maintain focus under pressure and composure and emotional regulation. And so that's something that also needs to be practiced too. So in terms of the training, I compare it very much to the physical aspect. And having come from a fitness background where I was training athletes and non-athletes on a regular basis, we can see the investment that's required for the physical gains. So it's very similar, that it's definitely a practice and a journey, and it's something that we do have the ability to improve and control. So I think that's really liberating too, because I think some people approach it and they're like, oh, you either have a good mindset or a bad mindset, or you either are strong in this way or not. But it's something that we can all train.
I often give this analogy that I'll talk to athletes, even non-athletes. I'll give an example. I used to say Derek Jeter, and I was like, Liz, like, you got to like really up. So I'm going to go with like, they're like, I know what Derek Jeter is, but like, I'm like, okay, Aaron Judge, or where I'll talk about like a batter being up at bat. And I'll ask people, do you think he's thinking about striking out? And I would say like 99% of my patients are like, yeah, he's definitely thinking about striking out, right? And I think that just shows you how we're so biased to the negative, right? Just like automatically, people just assume that even the most like skilled athletes are in a negative mindset when they're performing at a high level. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you see with athletes in terms of these negative self-talk patterns that they kind of are commonly getting stuck in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just going back to what you were saying, how we have over 30,000 thoughts a day, if not more. And a lot of those are going to be negative. And what we, at least, when I work with athletes, a lot of times it's their own negative kind of beliefs about themselves that they're bringing in. And then they have the negative beliefs that either is put upon them by their coaches or their parents or their teammates or just kind of society and is expected of them. These kids put so many hours, so many months, so many years into one sport. And to get to a point where they're successful and they get recruited, and then if they get an injury or if they don't play well, it can be catastrophic. And there's just so much shame around it and guilt that they spent so much time, so much money of their parents. And, they feel like they're kind of wasting, quote unquote, this opportunity that
Mhm.
was given to them.
Is there a way for people to take that tendency, right, to kind of be self-critical and flip it on its head and have that ability to think about your performance and strengthen it, use it for good, not evil, I guess is another way to say it?
I think, yes, that's much of the work that we do. And at its most basic level, when we're talking about that self talk and if the batter's up at, ready to bat and whether they're thinking about striking out or not, it's really trying to quiet that negative voice that's there to, you know, ultimately try to protect us. And when it's not useful, then we need to edit that and rewrite that script. And so I think one of the first and most basic things is just what is the story we're telling ourselves? And one phrase that I heard that really resonated with me is that the mind doesn't believe what is true, it believes what is repeated. And so if we start to just observe our thoughts more and think, okay, well,
Mhm.
this story that I'm telling myself is I'm not good enough. I'm going to strike out. I, can't perform well if I didn't get a great night's sleep or any of these things that all of a sudden start to become our own belief systems. And in a way, they do become these self fulfilling prophecies. And so if we can observe and then reframe and rewrite that, we certainly do not have to believe everything that we think. And so it really is this discipline
Mhm.
of what would be a more useful thought for me in this situation. And when we get into high pressure and high stakes situations, just like we plan for, if you're a pitcher and can't throw or you're not throwing strikes, then it's like, okay, well, what do I need to do to reevaluate this and focus on your form and your windup? And we don't really plan in advance for like, okay, when I'm feeling that pressure, what is my mind going to be thinking? So what's that mental
Right.
fitness part of it that I'm bringing to the game? And so a lot of the conversations that I have with athletes are like, okay, when things go wrong, when you have a setback, when this wasn't something that, you expected or it's not going well, how do you reframe that and bring that back? And so much of that is the self-talk. It's like being your own coach and cheerleader.
Okay. Rhodey, I like that. How do you interrupt the story? And then it seems like it's a two-step process. Increase your awareness to what's actually being said in your mind, and then making a choice around what is effective in terms of your thinking process. And it seems for a lot of us, reframing or coming up with a more healthy thinking process is going to improve your physical game, right?
No, absolutely. And when I was first giving a presentation on this, I was like, "Oh, we can't have the negative thoughts and we don't want negative." But I tried to back off and just say, ask actually what's useful and what's not useful, because I think there's a small minority, but most of us, the negative self-talk is not a motivating voice to have in our head. But perhaps for some people, like, come on, get your stuff together and kind of a little
You
bit
can
of
say
like the
shit, get your
tough
shit
love.
together.
Okay, get your shit together. That some of that tough love voice could be motivating, like get off your ass and what do you do, And so
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
it's a personal thing, but it's like, okay, if that helps push you forward and that energizes you to perform better, like use what's useful, but have that discernment to know this is helping me or this is actually completely draining me.
Right. Is it upping your energy or is it making you feel, shameful and heavy and frustrated? So I think that one of the things too that we hear a lot from, I don't know, it's just a phrase you hear over and over again, focus on the process, not the outcome. And I always am telling people, like, all right, if I'm watching that happen, what does it mean? It could mean 1,000 different things depending on who you're talking to. So, how would you say that people can put that into a practical first step to take when they say, now I'm going to focus on the process? How do you start that?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this with athletes because they're so kind of tunnel vision about what's in front of them instead of what, staying in the present and what they can control now. So a lot of times with the clients that I treat, it's really just about kind of practicing that mindfulness and being in the present and focusing on if the athlete is focusing on, let's say, they want to, you know, have triple doubles, or they want to score 5 goals, or they want to, be, have a sub whatever like time that they're running or whatever. We can focus on that, but then bringing them back to what do you have to do? What are the steps that you need to do to get to that pinnacle that you want to achieve? So a lot of times I'll tell kids, I want you to dream and I want you to have everything that you want in whatever sport you choose. But in order to get there, you have to back it way back a little bit and focus on, do you need to work on, your core strength? Do you need to, do some more like strength training? Do you need to get into the TrackMan bay and focus on your swing? Like, what are the steps that they need to take to get to that point where they're healthy in their mind, in their body? And then that will eventually lead to the outcome. We talk a lot at DBT about thinking traps. And if they have that mental filter all the time and they only focus on what's ahead, then it's going to be a lot harder to get to that point. So for me, it's just slowing the athlete way down and breaking it up into little chunks to help them reach their goal.
Yeah, and I think another tool, that, Carrie and I both use as well, that's just a really practical and simple way of addressing this issue is I'll have an athlete draw, a line down a piece of paper, and it's like on the left side, all of the things in as much detail and as many as you can come up with of what I can control. And then on the right side, the things I can't control. And it's just an illuminating exercise because we all are susceptible to really putting our energy into things that we can't control, but we'd like to, or we think we can. And so the beauty of this is it just helps bring our focus into the priorities of where we should be putting our attention and our focus because as much as we may want to score those 5 goals or hit that sub number for our race, what's in our control is our preparation, getting a good night's sleep, fueling ourselves, showing up that day with the attitude and energy, giving it everything we have. But our competition, the weather, and the outcome itself is actually not within our control. And when we put too much focus and energy there, it actually becomes such a distraction. And so, if you can help athletes see
Mhm.
that, then I think some of the slowing down aspects of just really trying to be present and you practicing that, they find actually this is more helpful because I should try to let go of all the things I can't control. And that's just not our human nature, but it can be effective.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Um, because I think there are different types of, obviously, sports athletes, etcetera, and there's some where it feels like I'm thinking of a tennis player where, yes, you're part of a team technically if you're playing for your college, and you are yourself, your name is up there on the list of your ranks, etcetera. It's like very much that individual sport or at
Mhm.
least individual recognition of talent versus someone who's on a team where the team is the one on the scoreboard, on the ranking
Right.
list. Do you see a difference in that process versus outcome difference for athletes where it feels like more of that individual ranking versus a team sport? And the reason I ask this is because I think about a team sport, it seems like so much more would be out of your control
Right.
technically, but I'm not sure that there
Mhm.
actually is that much of a difference. But I'm just wondering if that's something you have to navigate.
I mean, I think it's pretty much similar. With the team, there's more out of your control because you have your teammates, you have the coaches. There's just like Rhodie was saying, there's just so much that we can't control, and there's so much uncertainty, when you're part of a team. But that goes with as an individual, you still don't have control over your opponent. You still don't have control if God forbid you sprain your ankle. There's certain things that both team and individually. I think as an individual athlete, they can be a little bit more in their silo and focus on what works for them in terms of, how much sleep do I need? What's my nutrition? What's my pre-game routine? How do I center myself? All that stuff individually. But, I think what Rhodie and I um, are trying to do is cultivate a team culture. So the whole team can to be in sync a little bit more. So you're doing it for yourself, but then it kind of transcends beyond that to the team. And so there's more team camaraderie, there's more unison, there's more in sync, just that togetherness. If there was, speaking of the Super Bowl that you were talking about earlier, there was an article, I guess Mike Vrabel was asking his team to give kind of something about you history. It's like the 4 H's, like history, heartbreak, and 2 other H's. I can't remember, but it basically, his whole
Headache, humor.
headache.
I'm just listing H words.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. No.
Yeah. But,
We'll
but
find
it
them. We'll put them in the
really,
show notes.
exactly. But he was saying how, and the players were also commenting on how that really brought the team together in terms of sharing that vulnerability. So you can be individual, like, the quarterback's the quarterback, but to have the quarterback know a heartbreak of his wide receiver or the heartbreak of his coach, it just kind of brings that next level of unity that I think a lot of time, teams are missing because kids are so hyper focused on, I got to work on my numbers. I got to get recruited. I have to, there's just so much of like me, because there's so much at stake for that individual athlete. Rhodie, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a really interesting question. And I think in terms of the mental and like kind of the mental performance training of it, it's probably pretty similar because we are focusing on the elements that we can control. And whether you're playing a team sport or more of an individual sport, we really want your best performance is going to be when you are present and able to focus despite the distractions of the pressure and the outcome. But no doubt in a team sport, there are just more variables. So I think that to Carrie's point, I'll give you an example. My youngest son is a runner at WashU, and the cross country season in particular is really challenging because they have to run an 8K. And so that's giving your kind of best effort for, around 5 miles. And it's really your ability to endure pain because it's so uncomfortable to be pushing yourself for that duration. And I remember after nationals, had a huddle up with all the runners, and he said, you can't perform at your highest level and endure this level of pain if it's not attached to something that's beyond yourself. And so, even with individual sports, like having for him, he was like, you're also performing for your team, or there may be something personal for you that you're attaching this performance to. Because if we're only doing it for ourselves, then it's going to be much more challenging to perform at that high level and endure what is asked of us. And I would say that's not sport specific. So to Carrie's point about like
Right.
being on a team and being aware of other people's vulnerabilities, and then I'm bringing my best so that we all rise together. And whether you're playing tennis or running, they're both individual, but you're also part of a team that has been a platform for you to get there. So I guess to go back to the question is that I think that process and mental training is the same, but I think that seeing yourself in a larger context of the impact that you're having, your performance is inspiring other people, and it's like helping your team succeed, and that's a really important and powerful vision for yourself too.
I love that.
Just to summarize a little bit of examples of process goals are things that are within your control, right? And they can kind of help you stay grounded in kind of like these high pressure moments. And I think, we're going to include in our show notes, both Carrie and Rhodie are involved with a group called the Saugatuck Mind and Sports Lab. And I think part of their mission is to hopefully make some cultural shifts around outcome fixation, since we know that leads to a lot of burnout and anxiety among student athletes.
Mhm.
Rhodie, you were saying something about your son and what their coach kind of said, but I'm wondering, I think my experience with college athletes is by the time they get to college, they're pretty burned out athletically.
Mhm.
They get to like the finish line and they're like, oh my goodness, this has just started, right? And the pressure,
Mhm.
like we've talked about, is just greater. So, and I think some of them lose their love of the sport a
Mhm.
little bit because now it's a job for them. And I'm just wondering, how do you help them reconnect with their original reason? I always say to kids, I'm like, the definition of sports, if you look it up, the word fun is actually in there in the
Yeah.
dictionary. But I don't hear a lot in my office about fun. I hear a lot of negative. So thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's 100% it. I think it's re-engaging in that conversation about one of the first questions I always ask when I start working with athletes is like, "What do you love about your sport?" And they inevitably have a list of things that got them into the sport, the team element, the physical challenge, the ability to overcome obstacles, whatever it is that they're coming up with, and just feeling that sense of pride that their sport has given them. And it's a reminder for themselves just in having the conversation again. And then we talk very deliberately about how can we bring these back to the forefront and make these part of the daily practice. And a big part of that that emerges in the athletes that I've worked with is really the team and the friendship is something that they value so much. And there is the burnout, but it's how do I reconnect and have the fun? And in some ways, take some of the outcome and the pressures off of it, bring that element of joy back for them so that it's not all
Yeah.
about the end result, which is really hard to do because everything is coming at us that's the most important thing. And so I think redefining what success looks like for them in that sport is one way of doing it,
Mhm.
and then really just leaning into what is it that I loved about it. And uh, practices and just going to practice with my teammates and then having lunch after, and being able to connect with them. So, trying to bring that deliberately into more of a daily, um, practice. I worked with one runner who was injured and she was still going to practices and she was like, it's so disappointing because I can't participate. But she ended up one of the things that she really loved about the sport was how people lift each other up and that they were a very supportive team. So she's like, I just show up and I'm their cheerleader
Mm.
and actually encouraging them and seeing them succeed, it it fills me up. So then we start to focus on that rather than like how
Mhm.
devastated she is that she's sitting out these races. So it's this
Right.
nuanced reprioritization, I think.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to the values and what the person values most in terms of camaraderie, friendship, teamwork, all that stuff. So just kind of refocusing on why they're doing it.
I guess there's a couple of things that I was thinking as we were just going through all the various things. One is sometimes there's what we probably strangely call in our therapeutic work, like a come to Jesus moment when you think, actually, the reason I loved the game initially or the sport is no longer there. Right. And I can imagine a few things where they might have to come to a decision point about what to do. So I'd love to hear more about what happens if you realize that the athlete actually isn't really in it for the same reasons they used to. And then is there something where at a certain point there are other games being played that are no longer the sport? And does that impact their level of happiness?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Rhodey and we did a workshop supervision group with Mitch Green, who's down in Philadelphia, and he introduced this concept of side game. And basically what we do is we have our client write together, we write a list of all the different things that they love about the sport, why they do the sport, what comes into their head about the sport, just everything. I want a varsity letter. I want to lose weight. I do it for my parents. I do it for the scholarship. I want to be in the NFL. Like whatever comes to mind, we come up with a list. And usually it's, in my experience, like the whole whiteboard in my office is full, like both sides totally full. Then we look at the list and we go down and put a plus and minus beside each thing that they thought of. And it's not that one is worse than the other, and it's not one is good and one is bad. It just gives the client a little bit more of pause to think about what this means. So if they have a plus next to, I want to make my mom proud, well, that is great and super noble. And I love that. And, all that stuff. It does kind of, like Rhodey was saying, it does kind of take us out of the process and why ultimately are you doing it for yourself or are you doing it for your mom? And so it's really just a conversation starter. And when the client sees the board and sees all the plus and minuses, that is a couple sessions worth of that, of good information. And then from there, I've had plenty of athletes that either from injury or from burnout, they decide, you know what, I'm good. I didn't get recruited. I'm not going to play club. I got injured. I don't want to push my body anymore. And then that's a whole other thing of accepting what the next stage is. So it just, side game is just another tool that you can use just to get more clarity on if the love is still there or if maybe they need to pivot. And it is a way to kind of reinvigorate and remind them, oh my gosh, there's so many amazing things here. Like, I love it. I love my team. My coach is awesome. The assistant coach, the trainer, like I love hearing the crowd. Just, I love what it does to my confidence. I love my body feels so good. Like all that is great. And then it just kind of reintroduces that passion that maybe they've lost somewhere along the way.
Well, I think when you were just talking, Carrie, we talk a lot about dialectics in our podcast, and it really does sound like side games can really help athletes like survive and maybe improve their happiness, like you said, like reminding of those positives, and then also kind of illuminating some of the costs that maybe they're not paying attention to as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we're really grateful for you guys being on. I'm really excited to share with our listeners some of the work that you guys are doing that I mentioned. We'll put in the show notes at your Mind and Sports Lab. Yeah. Thank you guys for being on.
Yeah, this
Thank
has
you
been
so
great.
much.
By the way, does anyone listen to outros? Should we do one anyway?
Thanks for tuning in to College is Fine, Everything's Fine. We hope you're walking away with skills you can use right now, whether you're just beginning to think about college, starting your first semester, or counting down to graduation.
If you like today's episode, you know what to do. Subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend or your roommate or your parents or that random person you keep seeing on the quad. Please don't be shy.
Want more tools, tip sheets, or courses? Head to collegeisfinepodcast.com or follow us on Instagram and TikTok at College is Fine Podcast.
We'll catch you next time with more real talk, more skills, and more of what actually works on campus. Until then, remember that we are rooting for you.